Alright, it's the end of the year in a couple of days, so this is the ideal time to ask ourselves whether Guild Wars 2 will still be worth playing in 2024. Actually, let's change the question. Let's ask who would enjoy playing Guild Wars 2 this next year. The game has undergone some significant changes recently, and the most important one is probably content pacing. Whereas we would previously get a major expansion every few years and then be left somewhat in the dark about what's next, we now get a smaller expansion roughly every year, and each of them will come with major patches every 3 or 4 months. These updates will introduce new parts of the story, new maps and instance content, but also things such as new legendary armor, relics, and even new weapons for us to use. I was skeptical when ArenaNet presented this change to their business model, but I have to admit, I very much like the new pacing. It seems to give the devs more opportunities to add changes to the game, especially when we compare it to the previous system. At first glance, this comes with the downside that we'll have to pay for a new expansion every single year. But they changed their pricing accordingly, and personally, I think €25 or dollars per year is more than reasonable. If you're used to some other MMOs, it's important to know that there is also no subscription fee. You buy the game and you get to play it whenever, wherever. As for the actual gameplay, you will either love or hate the combat system in Guild Wars 2. There is no tap targeting like most other popular MMOs, instead we have something more akin to action combat. This introduces a new element of skill, as you will have ample opportunities to avoid most forms of damage, which will also allow you to tackle content that might not always be possible solo in other games. I of course cannot predict whether you will like this style of play, but the good news is that you can play the base game for free, so you can try before you buy. The amounts of builds you can play in the game is still as varied as ever as well. If you've never played the game, there are 9 professions, or classes if you will, and all 9 of them have 3 elite specializations, which will completely change the way a class plays. A thief, for example, gets an up-and-close mobile playstyle when they become a daredevil. But they can also play like a long-range sniper when they become a Deadeye, or focus on shadow magic when they choose to be a Spectre. You should know, however, that if you do group content, you will most likely be forced into melee and close to your allies. So even with a ranged weapon, there will be times that you will need to get up close and personal. In the open world, however, not so much. There, your build will decide what range you can play at. The great thing about each class or specialization is that there is no single right way to play. Sure, there are meta builds, but even then there are often multiple builds to pick from, even per specialization. And the game is rather alt-friendly due to there being no gear treadmill, so over time you'll most likely have all classes fully unlocked and geared. In terms of content, the game has a lot to offer no matter what type of player you are. You can choose to explore the open world at your own pace and complete any challenges you might come across, and sooner or later you'll bump into a massive amount of people converging on one single spot for big events. These range from fighting massive dragons to taking back literal cities that have been overrun. And there is no barrier to entry to take part in any of these. All you need to do is show up, and the time these take will vary as well. Some might last mere minutes, while others will take close to an hour. And when you need a break, you can try out some of the fringe activities, such as roller beetle or griffin racing, fishing, or even one of the many holiday events that will happen throughout the year. If you prefer doing instance group content, there is a lot to pick from as well. The game has dungeons and fractals, as well as raids, strikes, and a few challenges for up to 50 players at the same time. The dungeons were introduced at the launch of the game, and it kinda shows. You'll get introduced to a story mode when you're leveling, and you can later revisit them to explore multiple extra pathways, but they're a bit rough around the edges due to their age. A more popular type of dungeon are fractals, which also scale in difficulty. There are currently 25 different ones, and they scale from level 1 all the way up to level 100. You'll have to gradually unlock each level, and you will eventually want to get a specific set of gear for the hardest ones. They are immensely popular and run daily by a lot of players, even during the off hours. And the hardest of them will come with an extra challenge mode for another added level of difficulty. Finally, we have raids and strikes. Raids were introduced in the second and third expansion, and they're still relevant to this day. People still clear them every week as they're pretty fun and they offer really great rewards. And there are even long-term goals tied towards them, such as a legendary set of armor. After the Path of Fire expansion, ArenaNet stopped giving us new raids. Instead, they chose to introduce strike missions. So instead of entering a raid wing with 3 or 4 bosses, strikes consist of a single boss fight. Some of them are much easier than raids, but others are literally the most difficult PvE content you can choose to try out. There are currently 13 in the game, and ever since the previous expansion, they come both with a normal mode and a challenge mode which will significantly increase the difficulty. Finding other players for any type of content is rather simple. There is an in-game LFG tool to look for other players, but depending on your region, you might have a better experience using some of the community discords. From what I understand, this is the most popular way to find groups on the North American server, while here in Europe, both the LFG and Discord are being used. I will say that if you are the type of player that is looking for an experience such as Mythic raiding, pushing for rank 1 in Mythic Plus, or Savage raids in Final Fantasy, this game's group content will feel rather lackluster and leave you wanting for more. One thing that can be challenging for both veteran and new players is figuring out what to do at the end game. Guild Wars 2 doesn't have a questing system or a linear way to unlock things. Instead, we get a rather unsightly achievements tab. And completing certain of these achievements will reward you with things such as titles and cosmetics, but they're also a great way to unlock permanent account upgrades. And on that topic, once you hit level cap in Guild Wars 2, you will keep gaining experience points, which you can then put to more account upgrades. These will range from unlocking auto loot so that you never have to manually pick up loot ever again, to new mounts, or even new ways to use those mounts. Unlocking all of them from scratch will take you quite a few hours of gameplay. As it stands right now, you will need 530 extra mastery points to unlock every single one. If that sounds a lot, don't worry though, as the game is rather generous with all of its rewards. Literally every single activity will give you something in return, be it focusing on combat, gathering, fishing, or even simply running around and exploring the world, or trying some of the mini-games. That covers the PvE side of things, which is what I focus almost all of my time on. There are PvP game modes for you to enjoy as well though. There is a typical arena that pits 2 teams of 5 players against each other with various maps to choose from and of course a leaderboard. And there's something called World v World, in which 3 different servers will fight for the control over 4 maps. This often leads to absolutely massive fights, but you can also choose to go at it solo and try to take over some of the smaller objectives. With all of that said, I think it's a great game for everyone to try out at least once. If you are looking for the most hardcore of challenges, this probably will never be your main game. But if you like variety, a smooth combat system, and frankly more than 11 years of content to explore, you'll most likely enjoy your time in Tyria. By the way, I myself have a lot of content plans for 2024, so make sure to subscribe if you want to find out more in a couple of days, and it would really help me out if you could like the video before you go.